Welcome to my channel. We're taking a little bit of a different path today. We are going to do something besides stitching. I'm going to start doing some of these videos just so that you can have something else to watch. If you don't want to, then you can just stick with the stitching ones. The title will be pretty clear as to which ones are stitching and which ones aren't. So today, you're going to come cook with me. So we're going to do some fun stuff today. The thing that we're going to work on today is a chocolate cake, but that's not any old chocolate cake. We are going to do a chocolate cake that it's got chocolate frosting on it, but it also, because it's a thin layer of chocolate frosting, not a really thick one, but I'm going to put a espresso chocolate ganache on the top and let it drizzle down some of the sides. I have had it. It's very good. So let's go ahead and jump right into that and we will get started. Okay, so I have my parchment paper down here. We're going to put this, I'm going to put it in the corner as much as possible because I want to save this for another use. I don't want to waste it. I'm just using a pencil, tracing it around the bottom part of the pan. You're not wanting to turn it upside down and trace this part because it would be too big. It won't fit inside otherwise. All right, I am going to just use a plain box cake mix. I know some people would prefer to make it from scratch, and that's just fine. I'm all about the ease as much as possible for most things. Some of the other things that you will need is some kind of frosting, which I'm just going to use this. You will need possibly, if you want your ganache to be shiny, a little bit of corn syrup, some heavy whipping cream, and of course the star of the show is some kind of chocolate. Now, I'm using, as I put in here, it's a chocolate espresso ganache. So I'm using just regular chocolate chips that have espresso. There's different ways to go about this. I've seen recipes where you use like instant coffee, espresso coffee or something. This is so much more easy doing that because it's already ready for you. Some other things that I am personally going to use is I'm going to use a little bit of milk, regular old milk, because when I use that frosting, the regular chocolate frosting, I need to put a base layer on. And in some cases, I will just use the regular frosting the way it is. And in some cases, I need to thin it a little bit. And when we get to that part, you'll see why. Some other tools that you will need. I am going to put my cake on a cake platter. You don't have to. It's got a little stand. You can put it on a regular old plate if you want. I've got a cover on that so then I can keep flies or from getting dried out and everything. You're going to need something flat to turn out your cakes on. So I'm just going to use cutting boards. A plate would work as well. I like this because there's no edge to it, like a plate might have. A couple other tools. I'm going to need a knife. This is like a frosting spatula. It's not very long. There are longer ones. I think I got this because I was going to do cupcakes or something, so I didn't need a long one, but now I still use it on the cakes. It works fine. And then a very long knife. This is a carving knife. It's really, really long. It's obviously not very thick here, but I need something that's going to be the width of the cake. There are tools out there. If you go to Joann's, Michael's, in the cake decorating area, there are tools there. It's kind of like this horseshoe-like thing with a wire through it, and you can determine the depth you want, and you basically saw through the cake with that to get it flat. If you want to spend the money, you can. I just happen to have this knife, and that's all I need. All right, so I have already baked my cakes. I didn't really need to show you me mixing it up in a bowl and putting it in the oven. So I have baked my cakes. And so I've got one here, and we're ready to flip. So I'm gonna move one of these out of the way. I take the flat thing, flip it over, take it out. Now, remember, I had parchment paper in the bottom. So I did not have to run that knife around the edge. All I have to do now is peel that paper off and I'm good. Now, I got to get it on its bottom. So I'm going to take another one, basically sandwich it and flip it back over. And now I can use this one again. I don't care that there's stuff on it because I'm going to do the same thing and it doesn't matter. Flip her over. Take that off. And even though a little bit of that's, I mean, it's really tiny layer is coming off, it's okay. And once again, we are going to flip. Okay. So in order for these to lay nice and flat on top of each other, I mean, if you were a kid or you may not have cared and you just stack these one on top of the other and they seem to be a little wobbly and you never could get it to sit right, is because it's got a little bit of that moundedness to it. I mean, you can see it, well, not see as well, but you know when you've baked these before that the center is going to rise a little bit more. That's just the way it is. So we need to flatten them, and there is the reason for my knife. I eyeball this. If you're not really good eyeballer, then maybe that tool from Michael's will be good, because that's going to leave, if you leave the tool flat on the surface and saw through, then you're going to get that same depth all the way across. I'm usually pretty good about getting them even. So I'm going to take it at the low point, and I bend down and look across as much as possible, so I try and keep that knife flat. And the problem is it's got to be flat in all directions. Flat the way you're going as well as the perpendicular level. So there's that. Voila. And I may go back and look at it from another angle and just kind of look around at it and see if I'm happy with it. If I just need to do a little bit of trimming just to make the cake sit right. I think I'm pretty happy with that. So I'm going to set it aside and we'll do the next one. Now, it's going to have, if you have a little bit of rounding at the very edge here before it goes, you get to your cut, it's okay. It's this much of a depth. When you got a big depth, that's where it becomes a problem, okay? Frosting can hide a lot of mistakes. Okay, so once again, we're going to go from our low point, start cutting across. Okay, and you can do lots of things with these tops that you're cutting off. Maybe your kids would like it. Maybe your husband would nibble on some of that. Lots of things. Okay, so I'm going to inspect all sides. I'm pretty happy with that. All right, the next thing, I'm gonna go ahead and put it, get myself a little towel, wipe my hands off a little. Put it on my cookie sheet. If you happen to have one that's thicker than the other, well, just because of how much you poured into one pan, use the thicker one on the bottom. It's gonna be a bigger, stable base. Alrighty, so we got that. I don't need the knife anymore. And this is where we're going to get into using the milk, the regular milk. All right, so I need some of this frosting out of here. I never use all of this frosting, so I'm not worried about having to use it in this fashion. So I'm just going to use some of it. So you can see I took, a little bit out. It's not a ton. And I'm going to water it or thin it out. So I'm going to pour a little milk just so it's not just water that I'm using. And I didn't use a whole lot of milk in there because I want to go a little bit at a time because I don't want it to get too thin. I can always add more frosting. And you want to go nice and slow, otherwise you're going to be splashing the milk out. And yes, you could use a spoon if you want, but since I needed, it's just easier to wipe the excess off of a knife than it is digging into a spoon. And it wouldn't go any faster with a spoon. Trust me, I've done it lots of different ways. Trying to break up some of the lumpier parts in there. Get it to incorporate in the milk a little bit more. Alrighty, I think we're getting to the point where it's pretty incorporated, and here's that, oh, I can scrape it off with a knife much easier. Stir that little extra bit back in there. Okay, so you can see it's a much more thinned out, runnier consistency. The reason that I do this is because if you've ever frosted a cake, you know, especially from a box cake, you know how delicate the cake is. And when you cut it off, it's even more delicate because now you're dealing with the interior and not a slightly harder exterior surface. So in order for it to not rip and tear, because if I took just this, it's too thick, and it would, as I tried to spread it, the cake would want to tear and come with the frosting and the knife. So if you have a thin layer on the cut part, you can come back and frost it with regular frosting, and it's not going to do that. So I'm just going to pour a little bit on here. And no, this is not the ganache part. This is just giving it, and yes, it's probably going to soak in a little bit, but it's still going to give it that base that you need to help with when you do put regular frosting on it. And I have no idea if I have enough exactly for both pieces. I may need to whip up a little bit more for the second piece. I just don't know. All right, so I have a good amount on there. And a big mess on my bowl. You know, if you're not making a mess, I don't know, can you call yourself a good cook? Yes, you can, because I tend to like to keep my area neat. All right. I'm going to go ahead and put the frosting on now, even though I just put that on there. And I'm going to stir it up, because if you've used this stuff, you know it can be even stiffer than you want it to be inside of this container until you stir it up, and then it gets just a little bit more malleable. Okay, take that out. So as you can see, the cake is not coming with me. And I am not a huge frosting lover. I mean, I like to have some frosting. Ganache is not frosting. Frosting is so much better than that. But I'm not a huge, I want a lot of frosting on my cakes or cupcakes. If there's too much, I tend to just take it off. So I am not putting a thick layer. Now, you can frost up your cake any old way you want. You can put as much as you want. But because I'm not a big frosting person, not only am I going to not do that, but because I'm going to frost the entire cake and then put a ganache layer on top, I think I'm going to have plenty of frosting on this, so I just don't need a really big layer in the middle. But I do want some, because like I said, it's going to hide a whole multitude of sins, but it also will help give a sticky layer for this next level, which I'm now going to put on. I'm just going to look around, make sure it's, you know, not overhanging in any particular area that it shouldn't be. Kind of even. All right, and now we're back to layering on some of this thinner stuff. And no, I don't think that it really tends to make the cake too like wet and feel mushy. I don't think it does that. All right, so I had a little extra. Didn't need quite all of that. That was probably a first. Normally I have to mix up some more. Did a little better job guessing. All right, now we're going to put our layer on the top. Now you can also have some of those spinners if you wanted to have something where the cake sits on this platter and then it's like a lazy Susan kind of feel to it. And that way it just spins around and you don't have to actually turn your platter, plate, or whatever you have your cake on. Those are kind of nice, especially for the sides, because you have to keep turning the cake around a lot. And I am going slow because even though I have this this thinner layer under there, I can still feel that it wants to pull a little. So just go slow. Just go nice and slow. And I'm not going to be super picky on how it looks. I do want it to be, you know, pretty flat, but it doesn't have to be like superstar look. If you see any dips or unevenness, you know, you might want to smooth those out, because when you pour the ganache on, it's going to cover up, you know, a certain amount of this look. If it was super bumpy from the frosting, you didn't take care, then that will show through, because as the ganache pours on there and lays on there, then it is going to, it will show through there because it will start to settle. All right, I've done the top and now I'm going to do the sides. I may do more on the top as I go around. We'll see how it is going, if I feel like I need to do more. Now, when I do the sides, I am not trying to get the frosting immediately down to the level of your cake plate, because then it's going to make a mess. You want to slowly work it down. So I'm going to go probably about 3/4 of the way down and then just slowly work it down to that level. It will stay much neater on the plate. You just kind of push it down towards there. If you've got a big piece, don't push it all down there, or you're going to have too much that's going towards that level to begin with. And I'm not, again, making it super neat yet. I'll go around probably another time or two to make sure it looks neat. Because when we do the ganache part, it is not going to cover all of the sides. It will pretty much cover the top, but then you're just making dribble marks down the side. So you may not end up having it cover the whole side. So you want it to look pretty nice on the sides. If you do like a lot of frosting, as well as having the ganache on top, you may need 2 containers of frosting. So I have made it all the way around. Now it's time to make it look a little nicer. So I'm going to make sure that I have actually come around and hit the whole top. And I'm kind of slowly going around and changing the angle of my knife to kind of scrape off that look there. Go around. And so I am kind of working on the top part a little bit right now, but I will get back to the sides again in a minute. Okay, now just to kind of lube up my spatula, I'm going to have a little bit of frosting on it as I start to go around. So kind of like I did on the top, I'm just going to go pull the spatula across, just kind of letting it sit there. I'm not doing any of the work like I did before, and I just slowly move the spatula up as I get around to my starting spot and slowly work it up to the top. And again, I may need to mess around with that top edge again. You're going to see things as you're going, so you'll know what needs to be fixed and what doesn't. This is why a Lazy Susan is nice, is when you're doing this. Okay, I think I have managed to get all the way around. So, as you can see, I've just smoothed it out on the sides all the way around. And the top looks, you know, it's good enough for what the ganache is going to be on. It's pretty flat. It doesn't have a lot of the hills and ridges. I mean, you can see a little bit of a spiralness, but it's pretty low-key look. It's not, I don't think it's going to show through on the ganache. So we are going to set this aside, let it firm up a little bit, but we need to make our ganache now. So let's get to that. Okay, now we're going to get to the ganache, which requires a little bit of cooking. There's so many different ways to do this, so many different recipes. I'm trying to use the easiest one there is. Now, you can microwave the chips. I prefer using kind of a double boiler system. And no, you don't have to have any fancy pots and pans in order to make a double boiler. I just feel like I can have more control on the melting and the heating of the chocolate than I can in a microwave, because I can watch it the whole time and know when it's done. Also, the chocolate, besides the cream, the heavy whipping cream, should not be getting wet. You don't want water in there. So with the steam, I feel like I don't know. I can't, in the microwave, yeah, I just don't care for it. So I have a pan here. It's got some water in it. It doesn't have a lot. There's probably, I don't know, half an inch or so in there. So you don't need a lot. It's just going to cause steam to heat up a fancy old bowl. Now, you're going to need a metal bowl. That is one of the stipulations, because you can't put a glass one on here. You need something metal. So the idea is this is going to cause steam to warm this up to a nice slow consistency and not warm up too fast. You have control over it. Now, our recipe, as I mentioned, is I'm using the chips. It calls, now if you want to use other chocolate, you can, and add your coffee flavor or not add the coffee flavor as you choose. It's 8 ounces of chocolate. These bags are 9 ounces. So, oh darn, I have some that I can eat. If you want to melt all 9 ounces, you can. It's not going to be the end of the world. So pour those in, maybe just a little bit left. Then we need half a cup of the heavy cream. Some recipes call for more. I don't need more than that. Now, we're going to turn this on the burner. I keep it pretty low. Probably 4 out of 10 or something like that. I'll kind of play with it and see how it goes. That is all you need right now. If you're going to use this, that comes at the end, the corn syrup. And that just, the only reason, and I've seen recipes with butter in them as well. Maybe that's to substitute for corn syrup. That's just to give the ganache more shine if you want it. You don't have to if you're trying to stay away from this kind of stuff. don't put it in. It's still going to look fabulous and taste good. While this is heating, I'll talk about this real quick. I mentioned that maybe if you are a frosting lover and you want it a little thicker on your cake, and you might need to, because I mean, there's not a whole lot left in there, and I did not put it on thick. So you might need 2 containers of these if you're a lover of this. This is going to take a little while, so I will probably just come back to you as it's starting to melt and show you different aspects of it, so you can see what it looks like as it's starting to get closer to what we want it to look like. As you can see, it is starting to melt. I don't stir it a lot, maybe just to make sure that the chocolate chips that have not melted are getting down to the heat source a little better. But maybe a little bit of stirring, and then I'll just kind of let it sit on its own for a bit. The thing I mentioned about not wanting the chips to get wet, in case you don't know about this. So obviously getting the chips wet themselves, not that great. But if your bowl has any moisture in it, like a drip of water or anything, then you want to wipe that out. The reason that water is bad is because when you're trying to melt chocolate, it will cause it to be more of a crumbly, almost a curdled kind of look to it when it melts. It's not good. So you want to be real careful, and you just don't have the moisture in the bowl or on the chips. So yeah, just be careful of that. If you feel like things are heating up too fast, just turn your temperature down a little, and you can get more control of it. Get some of this stuff off my spoon. But you can see it's melting pretty good. It hasn't taken very long. I probably only had the video off, I don't even know if it was 5 minutes. So it doesn't take a long time. Right now it kind of looks like there's no more chips, but it's still lumpy. I can still see the consistency that it's not quite where I want it to be. So we're not quite done yet, but we're getting close. It's looking like it's pretty close to being done. When it gets to this point where I think it is, I do stir it quite a bit more because I probably don't need to cook it that much more. One of the things I will do is just take it and let it fall. Make sure it's not really goopy. I guess that's the best way to describe it. If it's running pretty consistently and you know have a bunch of goops, that means you're probably got everything all melted and it's ready. So with that, since I think it's pretty well where I want it, I'm going to turn my stove off, remove this, get that out of the way. I don't need to give you a facial. Now's the time when, okay, my bowl isn't too hot. You would add some of this. You can add up to 2 tablespoons. You can do a little less if you just want to make sure it's going to have a little bit of shine. I'm not going to measure it. I probably won't put in 2 tablespoons. Move you over a little bit here. I'm just going to add some. Yeah. Just to give it, make sure it might have some shine in it. I'm going to stir that up real good. This may not seem like a lot, but because I am not covering the entire sides of the cake and everything, cover the top and then let some of it drizzle down the side. The last time I made this, I actually had leftovers. I had quite a bit left over actually. So you don't need a lot of this. So if you want to make a smaller batch, you can. I just don't know, for example, how much to tell you to make less of. You can always use this on other things too if you wanted to. The next step would be letting it cool down to the consistency you want it to be. If you want it super, super runny, you could do it now. I am going to let it cool just a little bit because I think it's a little too runny for me right now. Okay, so it's probably been about 3 to 4 minutes. I do stir it quite a bit while I'm doing this because that does help it cool off, but then it also helps me to know when I'm getting it to the right consistency. And it seems to be a little thicker pouring not quite as runny as it was before. So that's, you know, I want it to pour a little and to run down the sides a little. So I don't want it completely stiff. I do this very slowly, little bit at a time, because I want to control how much is going over the edge. You'd be surprised if you just start pouring a bunch, you think, oh, it'll spread out and it'll cover the top and it'll run down. And then you'll have puddles down around this edge. So you want to be nice and slow. So I'm going to just use my spoon and drizzle. And be patient and watch it spread out so I know where it is going and how much is on there. So it is slowly moving out. We need some more. I'm going to put it right back in the center again until I can tell if there's specific sides that aren't reaching as much as it should have. You probably could tilt the cake a little bit and let it run faster, but patience is great. Patience will be great. You can tell there's a little more coming over here, so I won't need to put much on that side. And it is getting closer to that edge, so now is when I really need to be paying attention to how fast it's moving and where it is moving to. And you might end up starting to put less and less on it, because it will come and bite you real fast. And you'll be saying, no, I don't want that much there. And it'll be too late. Okay, let's do a little more. Okay. This side looks like it's about to go over the edge. So I don't want to put too much right there, as well as this side back here. Okay, a couple of spots starting to go over the edge. Now is when you have to get really careful about how much you're putting in a spot. I'm putting a very thin drizzle along this so I can control how much is going over that edge. You don't really want to pour it in the middle anymore, because as it pushes more of it out, excuse me, it's going to push more over those edges that are already falling and causing those puddles. So you're going to have to start being much more precise on where you're drizzling it. This edge is looking pretty good. I've got a couple of spots. I might have let it cool a little more than I had before, because a lot of times as it self-levels, it fills in any holes I have, and it doesn't seem to be doing that quite as much as it has before. And it's all going to depend on how much you want drizzling down the sides. If you want a lot, then you're going to keep going. If you just want it in some spots, the way it kind of is on this one, then you would stop. I don't have quite as much on this side, that's why I'm drizzling a little more over there. So there is a little bit of puddling. It's going to happen because, you know, you can't not have that happen. You can kind of see there's a little bit of puddling on the sides. I don't have a lot drizzling down because this is a lot. This is a lot of ganache. And I kind of want it to have more of this look where it's a little more sparse in the drizzle. It's not covering the whole sides, but you can see the drizzles a little bit better. So I'm pretty happy with how that's going. If you're really worried about these little air bubbles, you could probably get a toothpick and poke them so that they'll settle, and you don't want to wait too long because you want it to self-settle after you pop them. But you could do that. This is just for me, so I don't care. But as you can see, we got some lovely goodness here. Well, I hope you enjoyed that. As you can see, we have a lovely cake now. Very yummy. If you watch my other videos, the floss tube videos, you may be saying, that cake looks awfully familiar. And yes, it does look familiar because I had it in the Let's Celebrate video under the birthday part. So yeah, I hope you had fun with that and learned something and want to make it now, and we had a good time together. Hopefully we'll have some more of these, some different kinds of cooking things, whether it's baking or actually cooking more meal type things. But yeah, I hope that you enjoyed that and that we will get together again, do some more cooking. We'll see you next time. Bye.